What's up, guys? This is Geef/Kev69 back at another crappy video. We wanted to do an update on how the PC's going. It's dragging on, like, we're waiting for, like, things to come out so we can do better tests. Well, we're just lazy, and it's a weird time where no one can even get this hardware. And it's kind of irrelevant because no one has it. But it's dragging on. We just want to say something about it. We've got our crappy script here. We've even printed it out because we have to reboot into BIOS. And we won't be able to see anything. We're doing it with the camera in spooky dark lighting. Hopefully you can see something. And just to add my experience to the pool, because, you know, when you think about something, you watch like 20 videos about it to get a opinion on how it goes. So this is my experience. Also, it's not some incredible guide or anything. I haven't upgraded a computer in 10 years, so I don't even know what I'm doing. So this is just my experience. So first, any regrets? Well, in the build, we said it was a weird time that the 7 gigabyte per second drives were coming out, but we didn't want to wait. But guess what appeared like a month later? 980 Pro for less than what we paid. Fuck you, PCK. I even emailed them. Like, this is my experience emailing a shop or like calling a shop. Hello, shop that sells X specific product. Do you have X specific product in stock? What, mate? Producto what? Computo what? Do you think this is a computo store? No idea what you're talking. Fuck you, PCK. How about that? Like, I emailed them and they were like, oh, we got no idea when it's coming. Fuck you, PCK. How about that? Yeah. So, no 7 terabyte, 7 gig second NVMEs. Fuck you, for cheaper. And then we wanted to get the Arctic Liquid Freezer, but there was no distributor for Australia. Guess what appeared a month after purchase? Oh, the Arctic Liquid Freezer. Fuck you, PCK. Like, and it's so cheap. We didn't want to buy the fucking Kraken. We wanted this, but I don't know. Like, and we'll get to it later. I don't know if I still want to try it because we're thermally limited. Like, what the fuck's the point of a 360 AIO water cooling and you're still thermally limited? Like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, and then there's like the offset mount, which even further improves temp. So we kind of want to test it. $200, it's not that expensive. I don't know, but I don't think it's gonna help. And we also want to try one of these kits, but I don't know. We'll talk about that a bit later. Any issues with the computer? We got some pictures here. Should we just full screen this? So this started happening with the fans, like, the top one's meant to be just like the others. It's like, what the fuck's going on? Like, replug it, swap fans around, same issue. Only those ones, the vertical mount. And, yeah, we're swapping things. We're unplugging stuff. This is like the fan controller that comes with these fans. And you couldn't even unplug this shit. Like, it's so tight. We destroyed 3 of these. We bought 3 sets of 3. And we destroyed it either by ripping the cables off the fucking header, or the header's like jammed in there. There's nothing to grip. We weren't trying to like muscle it or anything. There's just no way to grip it. Or these clips would get jammed. It's just awful design. We destroyed 3 of them. It's insane. We had to buy another pack locally because we didn't want to bother with like warranties. And this wasn't even the problem. So no matter what changed, it was still the issue. I thought maybe like the SATA power was limited, like, because they're like, it added up to like 80 watts or something. But no, the issue was when it's mounted vertically and you screw it in, it's you know, depending on how you mount it, it's pulling itself apart. So the contacts, even though this clips together, it was just enough to rip the contacts apart, such that it was corrupting the LED signal, causing this issue. So the solution was to simply crash it together when you're screwing it in, to make sure the contacts stay together. And, I mean, we can do a little demonstration. There's the PC and they're all fine. So yeah, I was fucking pissed though. But yeah. So it was just gravity's fault. And it only cost 3 fan controller destruction. Oh my god, that was a fucking disaster. Let's not talk about that. What next? The Gigabyte RGB Fusion. So with this Gigabyte motherboard, you buy it didn't even open. Fuck you, Gigabyte. Launch App Center. Why didn't it? Oh, because we clicked cancel. So, like your App Center, which has like random Gigabyte recommended apps and what the fuck? Hello? It does like drivers and like Gigabyte software. So there's Gigabyte RGB Fusion, which is to control LEDs from the motherboard. If we go down, here we go. Is it even still here? Yeah, here. So this, every like 10 or 15 boots, this would cause a blue screen. I don't know if this is related to the, in general, AMD USB like issue that's been supposedly fixed if we go to the BIOS. This 33 BIOS, they're already up to I. Like, I was waiting because it kept going up, and we installed, I think, H, thinking, because it went quiet for a month, thinking it's stable, but no, it's still going up. So I don't know if it's the USB stability or the AMD thing, I don't know. But yeah, like RGB Fusion was causing a blue screen every like 10 boots or something. Plus we don't even use it anyway. Like for the LEDs we just use the Leon Lee software. And we only just found out about the Red Devil has its own. I thought it was always red, but as you saw, it can change colors. Wow. Magic. And the other issue was when we were like going through our overclocking journey, we were overclocking the GPU and it was crashing, and it crashed to the point where I think it corrupted my BIOS, because after it crashed I couldn't even boot anymore. Like I couldn't even get, it was just black screen, you know, lights come on, beep, but just no video. No matter which port, how many monitors, anything. It just, nothing happened. Then we swapped out the GPU. Fucking had to, it's not easy. This is the problem with like a fancy vertical mount, is that nothing, you can't change anything easily, because it's all like related. So we swapped it out for our old 6970 and it booted. I was like, fuck, dead GPU. But then we remounted it after it worked with the old GPU, and it started working again. And then we flashed the BIOS. So I don't know what happened. Like it corrupted so bad that the BIOS got corrupted or so. I don't know, something. We broke it somehow, but we recovered. So I don't know what the hell that was. I guess we'll talk more about the GPU in the GPU section. So that's like the issues that we've had. So we're going to get onto CPU overclocking. And before we get into that, I have to say, during our overclocking journey, it turns out that what I thought was the CPU crashing was the GPU. So technically you can ignore everything that I'm about to say, because what I thought was the CPU crashing was actually the GPU. So we really we should go back and do everything again, but we just want to use it. And it's such a pain in the ass. We'll get to it. Like, these new Zen 3 CPUs, like, overclocking is not like what it used to be. So to get started, I'll talk about like what I did. My last computer was Sandy Bridge, Intel 2011. Anyone remember Sandy Bridge? Fucking legendary CPU, 2600K. What did you do to overclock that? Set voltage to 1.375, set multiplier to 4.7, and you're done. Like, that's all you had to do. Fucking, what, like 1300 megahertz overclock, 4 cores, legendary, 10 years of 4 cores, Intel thanks, legendary CPU, so difficult. That's all you had to do. That is not what you have to do with these Zen 3 CPUs. It's like a different universe. So these CPUs are incredibly sensitive to thermal, temperature, power limits, voltage. Even running like benches, every run you'll get a different score. You know, like, it'll get worse if you're running them continuously, if you wait a bit for it to cool down. It's so sensitive that, like, yeah, so there's that. It's not consistent at all. Every run is different. Then there's like clock stretching, so you don't even know what you think it's doing is not, because they have the PBO and it's got overclocking inbuilt, like, and it has its own limits as well, so you don't even know exactly what it's doing. Like, you're just changing the parameters that it can try, like a reference range, but the CPU does whatever it wants. So whatever you put isn't necessarily what you think it's doing, and it's so sensitive to voltage and temperature and all that. So it's nothing like what I previously overclocked. So the first thing is, you've got fucking 16 cores. So if we open up Task Manager, there's so many cores, it's not 4 cores, that you've got good and bad cores. And so, like, Sandy Bridge, you had fucking 4 cores. You just set them all to the same. It didn't matter. You didn't even think about this. But here you've got good and bad cores, and then you've got like binned cores, so the better silicon. So you can't even just overclock it. You have to find out which are the good cores and which cores are actually being used. And this just makes overclocking such a pain in the ass. And we're not even getting to like single thread versus multi-core loads. So that's a whole other thing. But if we open up Ryzen Master as well, so here it's got the stars, which means these are your best cores. I don't know like how they determine this, but there's some information that they think that, so here we got 6, 9 as the best. These are the CCXs because it's chiplet. This will be relevant later if we open up Paint and we just draw a square. So you got the CPU. You've got, oh shit, hello? 1 CCX, so 1 like core thing, a second one, and then the IO. So this is 8 cores, and this is 8 cores. And this will get into like temperature limits later, but so that's what that is. And so you have good ones and bad ones. And so these are like what AMD reckons are the good ones. But you'll find that this isn't actually the case. And then the dot is like the second best. So theoretically you want to be overclocking those the highest. But it's not that simple. And there's actually all these power limits up the top. This is like all convoluted, so I don't even know how you can form this. But the first thing is you got to find out what cores actually get used / because it doesn't matter which cores are the best if you don't actually use them. And what I found, and the point of this is just to simplify how long it takes to overclock, because what you should do is fucking set affinity for one core, test that, and then go to the next one. But you've got fucking 16 of them. Each time you have to reboot to the bot. It's going to take fucking forever. Like, ain't nobody got time for that shit unless you're like mega enthusiast. So it's all about simplifying. You want to use the computer. You don't want to like spend your life overclocking. So the first is to find out what cores get used. And I find that in my case, it's CPU 4, because these are threads, so 2 threads, 2 boxes per core. So CPU 4, 6, 10, and 16 have the most activity most of the time. And so that's like your starting point for when we get to PBOing. So whenever you're running things, you just open up Task Manager and see where the activity's happening. And this helps you like narrow down what the problem is. So even though Ryzen Master says 6, 12, 9, I found it's really, go back to here, it's actually 4, 6. 4 and 6 are like my 2, and 16 gets loaded for like background stuff. So it's deceptive, and it like sets up another like tangent where it's like, I mean, we'll get to it later, but like if you were to change, I don't know if it's worth disabling like in the BIOS preferred cores and all that. And if you could actually specify, because you're going to be bottlenecked somewhere, and it might not actually be what you think it is, but yeah. The point is, like, this isn't easy at all, and like, there's no like quick. It's not just set the multiplier to 4.7 and set this voltage. So yeah, preferred cores versus like best cores. Then we want to get to the power limit. So up here, there's electronically limited limits for the CPU, and this affects single core versus multi-core loads. And it's like you read like a lot of stuff on Reddit or whatever, and it's like people like, oh, my brand new Zen 3 CPU runs nice and cool in Minecraft. It's like, stock, it barely even turns on. Like, it's so limited already. Like, this is unlocked. The PPT, the TDC, and the EDC is like the important one. And at the moment I've got it on 220, but I found that for single core, like 210, and like, I originally thought you just unlock it and that should be the best, right? But they're so sensitive that you can't just set it to a limit that it will never reach, because that actually hurts single core loads versus multi-core. And yeah, so depending on what you want to focus on, and this is another issue where it's like, maybe I should buy that MSI Dark Hero motherboard, which has the detector, which if the current is below the dynamic OC switcher, if the current is below a certain amount, it's in single core mode, and if the draw is above, it switches to a multi-core, because they're completely different, and if you focus on one, it typically hurts the other. So yeah, I've got it at 220, which is closer to multi-core. I think if you want this to not actually max out, it's like 350 or more. But yeah, it like, that's the thing. Like, it depends on, you've got so many cores that it affects like what you're doing. So you can't just unlock it, and obviously stock, it barely turns on. So that's like the electronic limiter. Oh, and then on top of that, there's thermal limit of 90C. I don't know if it's like 80 degrees 85 back in my day, Sandy Bridge. That was like peak temps, but I don't know. These Ryzen CPUs just run insanely hot, and 90 is the new standard. You shouldn't be afraid. Like, you should be afraid if it's at like 105. I don't know. We'll see, because I guess they've only just came out, and no one has them, and the people who do have them, most of them don't even know how to, like, that's another thing, like, you can't even, like, post, like, I don't consider myself some overclocking god, but, like, people don't even know anything, so you can't really compare, and that goes back to the clock stretching, where, like, people read, like, some value of 5 gigahertz, but it's not actually what it's running at, or it ran it for, like, 5 milliseconds, or people have these limits different, or, you know, it's really hard to compare, like, your settings versus someone else, and it's something I want to get into later, which is like the worst case scenario where one CCX gets blasted and you end up thermally limited on a 360 AIO, which to me is unacceptable. But yeah, so limits. There's so many settings. So then there's like, what is a realistic load? Like when you bench, like back in my day, we did 8 hours of Prime 95. But it seems like nothing comes close to the load that Prime 95 does. And I don't know if it's like because we stagnated for like 10 years, but like AVX2 instructions, like all the optimizations in the last 10 years have been not AVX2 or whatever. So AVX2 just destroys CPUs. But like the older CPUs, they're slower, even though it's the same clock speed. But because nothing actually uses AVX, the new CPUs are better. But I don't know, like, so it's like a question like, do you really test stability in something that is so unrealistic that you'll never reach? So I don't think the conclusion is the settings I'm using, I don't even think they're stable. First, they're not necessarily even using the settings that you think it is, because it's all dynamic PBO. Then it's like, I don't think it's fully Prime 95 stable. But that doesn't matter because nothing runs AVX2 Prime 95. So do you really need to be stable for something that's not realistic? It's kind of like FurMark. I was never a fan of FurMark. Like, obviously you can write something that just makes every trillion transistor just constantly spike, regardless of whether that's a useful operation. So that's like another thing. It's like, this is a massive ramble, but it's like, I don't know if Prime 95 is relevant anymore, and so we'll get to that in a second. And when I run it, it might even crash, so we'll see what happens. So we talked about the dynamic OC switching. Might have to, there's Clock Tuner 2.1 is supposed to have that. I tried Clock Tuner. It just seems like super conservative. Like, if you don't know anything about it, I guess you can use Clock Tuner and it'll do something for you. But my experience is just way too conservative. It just sets a really low voltage and then tries to get the highest thing, and you end up at like 4.3. So like, what's the point? Like, PBO is better. And it's just the whole, like, multi-core versus single-core loads. Like, yeah, like, it really depends on what you're trying to do. So, if we just turn on Prime 9532, we've got this. Small FFT 32. got Ryzen Master. So we're peak current limited, 220 watts, 87 degrees, 4.4 in Task Manager. We're hitting thermal limit. I guess we're not on max fans. Plus we've got all this bullshit open, which affects it. But, yeah. Another thing is, like, I found sometimes it was crashing on switching, and that's like going from high load to low load. So, in this case, on a AVX2 load, it's only peaking at 4.4. But this is like the worst thing that you'll ever do to your computer, and it's not even something useful. So it's like, do you really work around this? And the whole 90 degrees, we're throttling at this point. So to me, it's unacceptable to be thermally limited on a 360 AIO. Like, what's the point of water cooling if you're still thermally limited? So I don't even know, and I don't even know if so if we stop it, if custom loop can even fix this, because if we go back to like the drawing, I guess I'll talk about it in a second when we get. This is a huge ramble, but you know, it's a complicated topic. So yeah, that's like worst case scenario. 32 threads, and even that, like 60. I guess that wasn't with 100% fans. We're even thermally limited there. If we put it on full speed. And we've remounted it like 3 times, so I don't think it's the mount. So I'm surprised how bad it is, even on a 360 AIO. So 100%. Small FFT 32. Rizeno Mastero. Yeah, like it hits thermal, it hits 90. I don't know if it's changed, like it used to not hit. This kind of depends, because we're at 220, so this is more all core boost. So when I was at 210, it didn't boost as high because the current's limited. So I guess, yeah, but the point is, like, it's unacceptable to be thermally limited on a 360 AIO. I just want to be able to unlock everything and not be temperature limited, which we are, which is just unacceptable. So with a different EDC limit, you might not hit thermal limiting and still have the same boost clock. So it just shows how sensitive it is to voltage and temperature. Because so the worst case scenario would be 8 threads, so 4 cores, like, because that's what like your game's gonna do, right? But then I guess we're not in single core boost mode, but this is the situation I wanted to show. So it instantly goes to 90. Instantly, 4 cores. And see how it's all on one CCX? 4.5. We're already thermally limited. If we look at the computer, 91 degrees. This is 8 threads, 4 cores. And if we go back to our picture, like, I don't know what the limit here is. Like, If we turn that off. So only 4 cores getting blasted. So 1 CCX, we saw it. So this 30 minutes down, oh my god, this is going to be a long ramble. So yeah, like, that's a case where I don't know if you could actually get better performance if you could spread the load across the 2 CCXs, just because so much heat on such a tiny surface area. And I'm interested, like, the Arctic Freezer had the offset, so the block was actually like across here, so that it was more on top of the actual cores, not the bit that doesn't matter. So this is where I don't know whether one of these kits can help. I don't know if there's a difference between this kind of block, because these pumps can do more water, but I don't think we're water limited. We're limited by how much heat the surface area can transfer, and that's the block and the surface area. So it doesn't matter how much water you're pushing through it, the water just doesn't have enough time to transfer the heat. So I don't know if this can actually help. The good thing about this is, you know, every piece can be swapped out, so it's a good starting point. But yeah, I don't know. Again, it's just unacceptable to me to be thermally limited on a 360 AIO. Like, there's a published saying, do dupis takiego kurwa chłodzenie, jak temperatura nie jest lepsza. Like, why water cool if you're still fucked? Like, what would it be on air cooling if it's this bad on a 360? Like, you can't get bigger than 360 AIOs. I mean, you can get 420s, but the cases don't fit them. Like, and I don't think the rad doesn't help. I don't think the rad helps because the water just doesn't. There's not enough surface area to transfer heat. Because if you look at the water temp, it doesn't, like, if it was a negative feedback, meaning the CPU was blasting the water and the water wasn't cooled by the rad by the time it got back, the temperature would just keep going up, right? But that doesn't happen. So it's not the radiator, it's not the flow, it's the block. There's just not enough surface area to transfer. So I don't know, like, if anyone understands anything that I'm talking about and has a custom water cooling loop and has similar settings and understands at least something like this, that are you able to remove the thermal limit on such a configuration? Like, obviously liquid nitrogen, but like, that's not practical for daily use. So it's just, to me, it's just unacceptable that a 360 AIO is thermally limited. I just want to be able to unlock all the power and not have temperature as a limit, but I don't know if that's possible. So yeah, like, that's a massive ramble about overclocking. What are we up to? We talked about clock tuner. We might have to try custom water cooling. And yeah, the worst case isn't even the worst case, because when we, in this mode of a higher EDC for multicore, we were thermally limited even at all 16 cores on AVX. It's not just a 4-core. So going back to the picture, even, did we just close it? I guess we closed it. It doesn't matter. Even when both of those squares are being used, 16 all core, you're still thermally limited. So it's just unacceptable. Like, I don't know. Like, hello? Anyone? So we'll get to like some basic benches. We'll open up Cinebench R20. We've got our previous. I don't like how Cinebench like has to override itself every time. That seems really, but whatever. Single core, no one gives a shit. That takes way too long. I guess I should have like. Maybe I'll add that later. It just takes too long to run single core, but I guess we'll just run a multi-core. Even with everything we probably won't get more than 11.5 because running the last like 200 points is like turning everything off and having nothing open. But just to prove that we're not lying, we'll see what we get. And if you run consecutive, obviously the temperature just gets hotter and hotter. So we got 11,450. That's a dog shit score. So the highest we've seen is 11.9, and that was with more multi-core settings, and obviously a dry run because it just gets worse if you just keep running. And the CPU temp was like, I don't even remember, 84. If we just run it again, let's point the camera at the. I guess we didn't set it to fixed. %, but whatever. So yeah, 82. Whoop-de-doo. 11.5, slightly higher. Wow. So that's that. Single core, I guess who really cares? It takes too long. And this is that override thing. That's why we lost our 11.9 score. I guess we'll open 23 because there's a new version, but reviewers have like all their data is set on the previous version, and it's like you've got all this data that you can't compare because there's a new version that no one uses. I guess we should open this to show what it's boosting to. 4.6. We can't have it all on the second monitor because sometimes it wants to boot into the top monitor, which is upside down. What did we get? Just under 30k. I think our highest I've ever seen is 30 and 30.5k. Peak temps 84, not a huge deal. It's only going to get lower. And this is obviously PBO, not static. Why does it not even show 29.9? Single core, who cares? It takes too long. What's next? CPUZ, I don't know. This just came with our thing. I don't really like the CPU benchmark because I don't even know what it does, and it seems like the benchmark is over before it even does anything. But yeah, we'll just run it, see what happens. The temperature doesn't even get up. The highest we've ever seen is 13.6 and 690 single thread. But I don't even like this bench because it's so short and it doesn't feel like steady state is even achieved. Obviously we've got all this bullshit open which takes off the score. CPUZ. So is that all the... So that's the CPU ramble. That was just a massive ramble and just shows you how, overclocking isn't what you think. And we haven't even gotten into the actual settings. So I guess now we'll reboot into the BIOS. So now we'll reboot into the BIOS. Oh my god, this is a disaster. We just kept putting off this video. It was going to be crappy, but this is my experience. the top monitor is upside down to minimize bezel difference, and it would like to, it sometimes picks the top one and the BIOS is upside down, so we have to pull out that monitor. So we'll just go to our BIOS settings, BIOS. So we're PBO with core offset. So if we go back to what we were saying, oh, we forgot to press we forgot to press the BIOS button. Whoops. Whoopsie. Oh no, don't look at my name. I guess we'll have to cut that out. Whoops. I guess we'll have to blur that. You didn't say that. You don't know who I am. Well, that was a disaster. Press the actual BIOS key, Del, to get into the BIOS. Okay. So we're obviously in a gigabyte board, but they all have the same. So AMD overclocking, accept. We go to PBO, and that's actually supposed to be... So the PBO limits, obviously advanced, manual, but what I found is what you put here isn't necessarily what it ends up anyway. So it just adds to the complexity of these like overclocking. So because you can, and the result can be different. Like for example, motherboard sets it to max theoretically, but it's not actually. Like I can't remember, EDC is like 640. Was it like 640 or something? But when you set motherboard, it's supposed to set it to 640, but it's not actually. But if you set it manually, it actually uses the number. And again, and then there's the whole, it depends on what your goal is. Like, the first two don't matter too much. It's the EDC, so the current. And so 210 I found was single thread optimized, and like 300, 350 is all core. But again, it's so sensitive that it depends on what you're trying to do, and depending on how long the benchmark is and like how many times in a row, and it's just convoluted. Scalar and auto, because like you don't even know what it's doing. Like I can say all this shit and then like the CPU does whatever it wants anyway. So like I don't know, yeah. And like this max boost override, I don't feel like this does anything. Like 0 to 200 doesn't make a difference, stability wise or boost wise. The CPU does whatever it wants regardless. So I don't feel like the override changes anything. I mean, it's only 200 megahertz. It's limited to current and temperature anyway, so it doesn't matter. So Curve Optimizer, this is obviously the important bit. So this is, the PBO has a curve that is depending on temperature and current limit. And this comes back to Windows preferred cores and what your goal is. So this is changing the per core voltage for PBO. So we're running negative 30 on everything except our two best cores. And negative 30, you've got 30 steps to go through, each of these representing like 15 millivolts or whatever. Imagine how long that would take. So it's just like, is it worth, like what you should do is start at one core, affinity your stress test to one core and check stability and then go up. And reboot. Rebooting BIOS takes like 2 minutes or whatever, and you're doing it per core. It would just take forever. So to simplify this process, first figure out from Ryzen Master what your best cores are. Then look at Windows Task Manager to see which cores are actually being loaded most of the time. And then start playing with the offset. So negative is obviously, so we're per core, obviously, and then negative, we're reducing the voltage. And I would just start high rather than go up, because it's just faster. Some people, it's weird, like some people say, like, another thing is, like, whatever you put here isn't necessary. I don't even know if it's real, like, because it's like, what is real? Like, the CPU does whatever it wants anyway, but, like, so, because some people say they can't even boot with negative 20 on all, but obviously you're going to be limited by the core that it wants to put everything on single thread. So I'm running negative 30 on everything except for my two best cores, which are not what Ryzen Master says. We're starting at 0, so core 3 and 5, which represents core 4 and 6, because I find those are the two cores that are typically used for single thread. So I don't know, I would start at like negative 10 all or negative 15 all and see what happens. Obviously first find out what your best core is, then find out what your Windows preferred cores are and go from there. And because it turned out it was my GPU crashing, like I don't know if I can actually be more aggressive on my best cores. And then at the end of the day, whatever you put here doesn't even matter. Like, the CPU does whatever it wants. So, yeah, like, it's just yeah. If you're really into this, there's so much to play here. But, like, if you just want to use your computer, like, I don't know. So that's my experience with PBO. And yeah, if it doesn't crash during the benchmark, but it crashes after stopping or starting, that's typically the LLC settings. But I don't know. This is just my experience. So negative 30 all and negative 18 and 16 on your two best. But yeah, again, it's so convoluted that, like, whatever you see here isn't necessarily real anyway. So I don't know. Your mileage will vary. And also the like what your goal is, like all core versus single core loads. But yeah, like some people say they couldn't even boot. And then it's like, I guess I'll just cover the camera when it shows, so I don't have to blur that thing again while we're setting up. Then there's the, like, if you could change what Windows cores prefers, you could get a better result. Like, that's how convoluted it is these days. So we need to cover up that one. So that finishes the CPU ramble. The main thing is, like, it's just not the good old days. You can't just set your multiplier to whatever and Bob's your uncle or whatever. It's just convoluted. We'll just open this. And no one even has a... Whoa, are we showing anything? No. I guess we'll just open the pictures for the next thing. I guess we'll just finish with... And the 59 and 50X has been sold out. Like, we ordered on launch day, 6 minutes, because we messed up. We talked about it in the build. It was 1250. And we didn't get it till like January 5. It was like September ordered. We missed the first batch. We got the second batch. And it's gone up by $100. And then there's the GPUs. They don't even sell the Red Devil Limited, but we got the Limited for $1,800. And when they did have it, it went as high as $2,300. So, I don't know, I'm tempted to just scalp my computer and, I don't know, like, try get the next gen, I don't know. I'd rather just use it, though. It's just a crazy time, right? I don't know. So that cluster F ends the CPU section. You probably didn't really learn anything. It was just convoluted, but whatever. So we're going to go on to hardware, hard drive benches. So the funny thing is we didn't even realize... Oh no. Oh no. I guess we'll just cover that up and hope that no one actually checks. You didn't see that. We didn't actually set up RAID the first time. Like, we thought we did, but we didn't. We created the array, but we didn't. We turned RAID on. We created the volume, but we didn't make the volume RAID. So, like, for 3 months or whatever. And we didn't realize until we ran a benchmark. It was like, wait, this isn't RAID. So we had to nuke. And that was when we were GPU overclocking and we corrupted the BIOS or whatever. So we lost everything anyway. So we were going to reformat anyway. But so yeah, we finally set up RAID 0. And this is the bench results. There's that guy, Tech Deals or something. He made a video about NVMe RAID, and he said it's not what you think it is, and it doesn't work. But I think it was just like immature drivers or something. Like, so I've got triple RAID, so on the CPU and the chipset. So it's a terrible config. I just did it for the hell of it, just to see what would happen. And so this is the result. And these are all worst case. So like one thread and low queue. But you can see sequential read 10K and 8K. So stock, this would be 5K. And this would be like 4.5 or something. So there is a benefit. Like, his result was that it's actually worse, but it's not actually worse. So I don't know if it's just the drivers got better or he just didn't configure it properly or something, just immature. There was another guy who also did RAID with Samsung, and he noticed the IOPS were bugged. So I don't know if this got better or worse, but I mean, these are worst case benches, and you can see it's not worse. There is an improvement. Whether that's worth it, I don't think it matters anyway, because you're never drive limited. It's always USB transfer, or if you're encoding the CPU, you're never drive limited. Like, you can say, oh, you've got this nice RAID array, but you don't record on that. You record on a camera, then you have to transfer it to that, and then you have to encode. So you're not limited by that. You're always limited by something else. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I agree with him that the best thing with RAID is you've simply got one drive. You combine multiple drives into one C drive, and it just makes it easier, right? But I don't know if it was older drivers or something, but there's not a performance regression, because These are all worst case, sequential, low queue, one thread. Stock would be 5K. This would be like 4.5. So, yeah. And like game loading is always CPU limit anyway. So like GTA 5, anyone? Like that hilarious 63,000 line JSON single thread CPU limit. I don't know if anyone read about it. You can Google it. Some dude fixed GTA 5 loading because they were passing a 63,000 line JSON. I think that's hilarious, but yeah. Like game loading is always like a CPU benchmark. It's not you're rarely ever drive limited. And like IOPS, talking about losing IOPS, like when are you ever doing millions of random 4K reads anyway? Like, unless you're running a server, which we might do for WoW at some point, but I don't know. The point is, these are all worst case scenarios, and it's not performance regression. And it's triple RAID across the chipset, because the first slot is like using the CPU lanes, and the second and third is the chipset or whatever. So it's 3 M2s in RAID 0. And it's not worse than... It's not triple the performance. It's not even double. Well, it's about double. So it'll be interesting to see if I did just 2. But it's not regression. So I don't know if that's just driver maturity or whatever. And in these worst case 4K random reads, like, this is not worse than single drive. Like, this is the same as what we got with just normal. So sequential obviously improved, and random 4K worst case scenario didn't get worse. So I don't know, just some numbers to look at, not something that really matters. And then finally, I guess we'll talk about the GPU. I'm not doing any game benches because I don't play any modern games. So there's no real point to it. We're going to save the GPU review till later. But we're just going to talk about overclocking just quickly. We get FarCry 6 with the CPU, but that doesn't come out. We were going to play Cyberpunk, but then that turned out RIP my Polish game dev bros. Kurwa. Fuck game dev, dude. It's fucking ruthless. It's brutal. It's the Chinese factory. So we're waiting for more patches. Like, whenever they start working on a DLC is when we'll play the game. And we get Far Cry 6 with the CPU, but that doesn't come out till May. So we're probably going to play Far Cry 6 before Cyberpunk, and that'll be the first modern game. Because I played PoE, which no one gives a shit about in terms of benches. And it doesn't even have a bench. And Civ 6, which no one gives a shit about either. So we'll save, like, GPU benches for that, Far Cry 6, whenever that comes out. But we didn't get a golden sample. Like, if we go to performance, and I guess I can open... Where's, oh, here. Just a random... I thought this was hilarious. So this was, Firestrike. I don't even know if you can see this. Oh, God. And this result... Another thing is, like, the boost clock. Like, the GPUs these days are like CPUs. They have dynamic boost as well. And I don't think this was stable, but we made... That's another thing, like, stability for one benchmark versus sustained stability. I don't know if a driver changed, like, because I noticed multiboxing PoE performance went down. I don't know if it was a new driver, which affected like peak stability. 6 gigahertz Intel and SLI 1080s or whatever, so that you can't even get close to the top. But I just thought this was hilarious that we got the 11th best result. I mean, everything after DX9 was crap. I mean, Crisis, the last oh shit moment, was DX9. So who gives a shit about DX11 or DX12? It's just, we stagnated for 10 years. So yeah, that's just a funny result. And I don't think these results were stable. So the GPU was, what I thought was a CPU overclock crashing was actually the GPU. And so we managed only 2575 core and 2100 VRAM, like for long-term stability with max voltage and max power limit. Anything higher and like 10 megahertz high, it starts flickering and crashing like once every few days, and higher than that it crashes more regularly. Like, so it's like, is it stable enough for what you're doing or whatever? So definitely not a golden sample. People are getting like 2700 on 6800s, but we're not even, I don't know, because it's limited to 323 watts. So I don't know, we're waiting. They just released the liquid version. If we go over here, wait, the liquid devil, which comes with a BIOS which is like 10% higher limit, because the 3 8-pin isn't even being used. But isn't it voltage? Like, if we're crashing at max voltage and we're power capped, can that still cause crashes? I don't know. I don't actually know. Like you've got the voltage, but the power limit, I don't know. Like, I would have thought that the voltage would be causing the crashing. If we're not even stable 2600 at max voltage, it doesn't matter. I don't know if this matters, but it's capped at 323, and if we drop the voltage, it crashes. So not a golden sample. But we're waiting. People are like playing with unlocked BIOS. There's like GPU more power tool or something, but we don't need to be the guy to test that. So we're just waiting. On the Red Devil Club forums, people are asking for an unlocked BIOS. Another thing is, like, people are just setting it to 2700. They might be stable, but that doesn't actually mean the GPU's running at that. But yeah, so we're just waiting to see what people can achieve with an unlock, because it's definitely power limited. Like, the 3 888-pin and PCIe can do like 500 watts, and it's capped at 320, and we're unstable even undervolting, so we can't achieve the same at 320 with lower voltage. So I don't know if it can even help us. We just don't have a good sample, but yeah, that's something we're keeping an eye on. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. Yeah, so we're waiting for FarCry 6, a modern game, to do a more in-depth GPU benchmark. We're going to run out of camera life any second. It's a scuffed video, but we're we've just been putting it off, and it's going to be crappy anyway. It's just a long form rant about how the computer's going. So yeah, hope this gives someone a perspective. If you can even get this hardware, or you're just going to wait for next gen and just miss out on that as well. So yeah, it's a new generation. It's not the same. It's difficult. You can't just one button overclock. But yeah, it's fun though. So that's going to be it. Hope you enjoyed, and until the next time, goodbye.